Hey guys, thanks for joining me again. In this video, I'm going back to the whiteboard because I'm getting so many questions with my other videos about what the cost of oil changes are for my mach-e and what kind of maintenance is there. And it's kind of confusing people, I think, because the biggest issue with EVs is I think people don't really understand them, and that's the biggest issue because they're not complex whatsoever, and they're kind of pretty far away from a regular internal combustion engine, ICE engine. So I want to kind of go over this with you guys and the whole structure, and this is going to be a very high level overview of a electric car versus a comparable ICE internal combustion engine car. So don't rip me a new one. I'm just going over the main stuff, but I want to get you guys a general overview of how you power the wheels with an EV versus a regular internal combustion engine. So with my mach-e up here, you can see the main starting point to power the wheels is a high voltage battery. So it's about 400 volt battery. It's nestled right underneath on the bottom, so it gives it such a low center of gravity. So once you get the high voltage battery, we go simply to a converter to go from 400 volts down to 12 volts, which powers the 12 volt battery to charge it. And that 12 volt battery actually powers all your accessories. So like your internal stuff, like wireless charger if you have that, and then anything under the hood that might run 12 volts, especially like chargers and stuff like that. Phone chargers, I'm saying. And then if we go a little bit to the left, from the high voltage battery, it goes into an inverter controller, and basically it's taking this DC battery voltage and converting it to AC. And AC is usable for the electric motors. And there is a lot going on right here. And if you guys are interested, especially with my background, I can really go in a low-level overview of that, so you guys know exactly how it inverts the signal, inverts the power, I should say, to get to the EV motors. Anyways, so once we hit that gas pedal, it's inverting the power into usable AC, and it's going directly to the EV motor. Now the EV motor is, if you're familiar with it, just like an alternator, except it's just modified slightly. So the EV motor is basically, you got this stator coil that just literally stationary. It just stays there, and then you got this rotor that's inside of it. So the stator sends power to the rotor turns. That rotor is connected directly to the wheels. Simple as that. Nothing in between, we're good to go. Just so you guys know, the mach-e is all-wheel drive. I'm doing an all-wheel drive comparison from this to comparable Ford Edge. So my wife has this car, and basically the size and everything are very comparable, and they're both all-wheel drive. So I wanted to give you guys an exact comparison of the two similar vehicles, and that's basically it. So you guys have like what, 4 steps or so to get power to the wheels, and that's it. And then you got obviously your accessories. It's very basic. I think the ratio was like 1 part to every 10 internal combustion engine parts on an EV. So like you have 1/10 of the parts that an internal combustion engine has. So now let's get down to the internal combustion engine. Again, very high level. You got your fuel pump. It's going to pump. It's going to be located in the gas tank, and it's going to pump gas into the internal combustion engine, as you can see right here. From the ICE engine, it turns the alternator using an accessory belt. That alternator powers your 12 volt battery and all your accessory systems. That's not supposed to be there. And then if we go the other way, the internal combustion engine, obviously, high level overview, it's basically just pistons going up and down. With compression, it pushes the piston down, which turns a crank, which basically goes to this transmission. Now this transmission can range from like 6 to 10 gears nowadays, and all it's trying to do is keep the RPMs low, torque high, and then you get power basically out of the engine. So from the transmission, it goes into a transfer case. So the transfer case, with this all-wheel drive system, you need to somehow get power to the front of the vehicle, the axle and the wheels, and then the rear as well. So in an EV, there's usually just two electric motors, two EV motors. One is sitting parallel with the wheels, and the other one is sitting parallel with the wheels in the rear as well. So when you power those up, it's really simple to just send power in that direction to spin the wheels. Super simple. In the internal combustion engine, it's not as simple. You have one engine and it's trying to change direction of power because your engine could be sitting parallel with the wheels or perpendicular with the wheels. Well, if you're turning a crank, you need to somehow transfer that power to a different direction. So a transfer case, what it does is it'll connect the front wheels to the rear wheels, and you can see here we got a rear drive shaft and a front drive shaft. So it's going to send power to the rear drive shaft, and then it's going to, since the rear drive shaft is going parallel to the side of the car, you need to somehow turn that power to get it to the wheels now. So what it does is the engineers create a rear differential, and it's a very unique type of component with gears inside of it, and when it turns, it actually sends that power 90 degrees. Very cool system. And then from there, you're getting power to the rear wheels. Now for the front, you got the front drive shaft, which again is just like the rear drive shaft, but it sends power to the front wheels. And then you got a front differential. Same thing, it needs to turn that power to 90 degrees. Again, guys, this is very high level overview. There is some cars out there that the front doesn't need like this drive shaft or anything like that because the engine is turned. This is just general high level overview. But because of that, because of all of this together, I want to talk about maintenance. So maintenance is in this red, pinkish color. As you can see, for the Mach-e, maintenance is very, 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 very minimal. Very minimal, up to 150,000 miles. So for me, when I calculated like the Mach-e, it was about $60 or so for 150,000 miles of driving. So, and what it really comes down to is this is your first maintenance, like major maintenance interval, is the high voltage battery. Battery has a cooling system with a radiator. It has coolant inside of it, and it needs to be cool. So that coolant only lasts so long, and they recommend changing it at 150,000 miles. So now we come down to the edge, the internal combustion engine. Very large amount of moving parts. So everything needs to be greased, oiled, cooled, everything. So starting with fuel pump. So you might have to, some vehicles, especially like diesels, need extra maintenance with fuel pumps. Gassers don't necessarily, but I've seen it a lot with, especially before 100,000 miles. So the fuel pump might need it. Internal combustion engine is your major source of maintenance. A lot of moving parts, gets very hot, it needs a cooling system. That coolant goes bad, needs to be changed. And then again, so now when we're sending power to the transmission gets hot, it's turning, there's gears, it needs fluid in order to lubricate everything. Again, transfer case, transferring power to different locations, still needs to be cooled, or not necessarily cooled through like normal coolant. It actually is just high viscosity oil. Rear differentials have, again, more oil inside of there, lubricant, and then again front differential because you have two of them, so double. So when we go over to the actual maintenance of these two vehicles, maintenance for my Mach-e is a cabin air filter every 20,000 miles. You got to rotate the tires every 10,000 miles. Now this 10,000 miles is high compared to normal cars. Usually it's like 5,000 to 7,500. Now the reason is this battery weighs 1,100 pounds. They center it so perfectly with the center of gravity that you get even wear on all four tires. Now the reason this car, the normal internal combustion engine, requires more frequent rotation of the tires is because you have a very heavy engine in the front and you got less weight in the back. So there's going to be more weight in the front to wear down those tires that they recommend, like, hey, you need to start rotating them every 5,000 miles or so, because then you want an even rotation so you don't burn through a bunch of tires unnecessarily. For the Mach-E and all electric cars, it's not as necessary. Now you have to rotate it because you got front tires are turning, so you're going to have higher wear on the front tires, so they recommend every 10,000 miles rotate them. Now the coolant, like I said, first major interval for maintenance is at 150,000 miles, and that's the high voltage battery. Pretty simple to change. It's just like any internal combustion engine. You have to change the coolant. You just flush the old coolant out, put the new coolant in, run it a little bit, and you're good to go. Top it off. Pretty simple. And then lastly, I put the accessory belt just because there's very little maintenance, but you never know when an accessory belt will go out. It won't happen too often, maybe 100, 150, even more than that. It might not ever go out, but I'd like to just put it there. Now, when we're coming back to the internal combustion engine, like I said, lots of moving parts. You can see all the pinkish red. Now the maintenance gets a lot longer. So you got your cabin air filter, same interval, maybe 10 to 20,000 miles. You got to rotate those tires more frequently. Now the engine has a lot. Engine coolant, they recommend that, I think it was every 50,000 miles. I did that for my truck at least. Plus it was a truck, beat the shit out of it. So you want to make sure your engine is nice and cool. Again, you got your accessory belt. This one drives a crazy large amount of accessories, so you definitely want to make sure that serpentine belt is good to go. Fuel pump, never know, it could go out. Now the engine, again, engine needs to breathe, brings in oxygen and air in order to combust, pressurize and combust in the cylinder. So you need to make sure it's clean air. So engine air filter every like 20,000 miles or so. Then you gotta cool the engine as well and lubricate it. So you need engine oil. So you're gonna have to change the oil every 5,000, 7,500 miles. Plus, so with the pistons going up and down, in order to drive the wheels, you have to change the spark plugs. So it adds gasoline to the cylinder, sparks it with the spark plug, and then pushes the piston down. Well, those spark plugs don't last forever, so you need to change them out, or they get gunky or nasty, especially with like EcoBoost engines. It's very notorious for that. The older ones, at least. Now the newer ones are port and direct injection, plus it helps with the valves on the top too. So then now we're getting into transfer of power. So transmission, again, needs fluid. You need to replace that. I did for my truck like every 50,000. I felt was comfortable. They said 100,000 for my F-150. It seemed pretty long for, it was a 10-speed too. It just seemed a little bit too long, I feel like. I don't know. It doesn't hurt to replace it. It's more just a waste of money if it's not bad. Again, transfer cases, you got to transfer the power to the front and the rear wheels, and that transfer case wants to be happy with fluid. So you got to replace that. Differentials, again, you have to turn that power 90 degrees to get to the wheels. That fluid needs to be changed. And then lastly, and you'll see that I did not put it on the Mach-E, so brakes and rotors. So internal combustion engines rely 100% on brakes, rotors, pads, everything. When you let go of the gas, it basically just idles the engine and cuts power basically to the wheels to a certain extent. I know what you're gonna say, but anyways, you're gonna just idle and then slowly go to like the stop sign you're hitting. So, but you're gonna need to hit the brakes. So those brakes and rotors are gonna do their job and slow down the vehicle. Well, after so long, those rotors and pads gets worn and worn and worn and more worn. So you're gonna need to replace them. And this heavily depends on your driving. I've went 100, 125,000 miles without having to replace them for one vehicle like my Kia. But then when I had a Pontiac G6 a long time ago, love that car actually, but God, it was constantly breaking down. But brakes and rotors, I kid you not, I was replacing every 25,000 miles, and I barely used the freaking brakes and rotors. Like back then, I was going like 10 minutes down the road to like a job that was really close. Like, I never understood that, but after a lot of research, back then I was like 16, the Pontiac G6 was notorious to go through brakes and rotors. Not entirely sure why. I never really looked it up now that I'm older. But it is what it is. So I replaced those every 25,000 miles. And I kept that car for like 100,000 miles. So yeah, I changed it about 4 times or so. But as you can see, maintenance-less, gigantic compared to the mach-e. And also, again, with the brakes and rotors. So the mach-e and electric cars are different. So I believe maybe Tesla might be the only one where there's like a service for the brakes, because when you start decelerating, the EV motors, just like an alternator, it has all this energy in it, this magnetic energy. And what it needs to do is it's trying to get rid of that energy, and it has nowhere to go. So what they do is they pipe it right back into the high voltage battery. So when you're going downhill, it's very, very common for your range to go up, which is pretty sweet. But because of that, there's also motor regen. It's kind of like just like engine braking for like big semis. They rev it out like crazy. They rev the engine like crazy to slow down the wheels. Same thing with this. You got so much magnetic, I'm gonna say flux, but it's not technically, magnetism in here, and it's trying to slow down the wheels. It's trying to keep it still, but it's not. There's just too much momentum, so it's holding back, but it's generating a whole lot of energy. So it pipes right back in. Well, because you're slowing down so heavily, you don't need to use the brakes. Like, it's very, very seldom that you ever need to use the brakes. I have a whole bunch of friends that have Teslas. Their regen is stronger than the mach-e. I know that for sure because I tested them, obviously, both of them. But the Mach or the Tesla, because it's stronger, you use the brakes more infrequently. So you need to get a service done where they like kind of lubricate the brake parts just to make sure they're okay. I'm not entirely sure when the service interval is for that, but I think it's really late, like 100,000 miles. And it's a really quick service. They just lube everything up, basically. Now, for the Mach-e, it's slightly different. So the Ford engineers basically copied Tesla and was like, hey, what are you kind of doing differently that we can kind of improve upon? Really, everybody's copying each other. So what they did is under 5 miles an hour, the brakes actuate. And it was kind of weird because you can vaguely hear it while you're driving. But like basically when I come to a stop, like the EV motors bring me to a stop, the brakes actuate. So it's like holding me still, which actually I kind of like. And in that moment, it's actually actuating everything like a normal car would, get all those fluids moving, and get all the lube going. And, excuse me, with that, it actually does its own service, which is kind of cool. So, me compared to Tesla, I don't actually have to get that service done, because mine actuate every single time I slow down and completely come to a stop. So it's kind of nice. And really with like Tesla, I think it was only like $500. So even in 100,000 miles, you're spending $500. Like, that's nothing. Like I said, for 150,000 miles, I am spending $60 basically to just pay for cabin air filter. Rotate the tires, I do myself, but I know like down the street they offer like $20 to rotate your tires. So I guess, you know, you might be a little over $100 if you don't rotate your own tires. Oh well, not bad. For internal combustion engine though, you're going to be spending thousands. Like, it's just standard. It's really standard. So another thing that's really cool is a couple fun facts about EVs. We have over-the-air updates. So everything is more electrical compared to mechanical with internal combustion engines. There's only so many mechanical parts you can put in a car with electrical as well. So with the Mach-e, you have a lot more electrical, and there's sensors everywhere on this vehicle. And it's constantly monitoring everything. And what it does is it's sending all this data back to Ford. And it's like, hey, all these people with the Mach-e's, this is how they're driving, this is how the temperatures are, all this. It's just so much, being like a test engineer that I am, all this data is just so incredibly useful. And it's perfect for like Ford and Tesla and Chevy and all that stuff, because this is not a like closed loop system, I guess you would say, because what they could see is, especially if you're going down, like going cross country, and they're seeing that like the EV motors are heating up or something like that. They can diagnose that and actually fix it with a software update, because the software update, they could limit maybe power going to the motors just to keep it a little cooler. They could do so many different things. Well, I didn't even have to go to the dealership for that. It just automatically sends them the data, which I guess privacy. I don't want to get into the privacy thing, but I don't care. But what they do is now they have diagnostics. So they got a tech service bulletin or a recall, whatever. They have all this data. And if you guys are familiar with like Tesla with the full self-driving, they sent out a beta, and basically they made it just safe enough for these testers to test out the full self-driving. And then Tesla gathered all that data and was like, this is how we improve it. Based on their driving habits and where they're at in the country, we're gonna be able to update the full self-driving to make it better. Now on the internal combustion engine side, like I said, not as much electronics, still a lot of electronics, but it's not really it's a closed loops diagnostics system, and everybody's familiar with this. If your check engine light comes on, you're gonna have to go to the Ford dealer, whatever dealership you need. They're going to diagnose it, they're going to gather that data manually, send it to Ford, and then fix the vehicle on the spot and send you on your way. Now, after X amount of customers that come in and are complaining, they'll finally do like a tech service bulletin, or if it's major, like a recall. The problem with this is it takes way too long. It takes way too long. It's literally like the 2015 Edges might have had an issue, and we don't get major usable data until like a year or two later. That's way too long. The mach-e, for example, I've already had 3 over-the-air updates. I've had the car for 5,000 miles. Now, is that a bad thing technically that I had updates? I don't think so, because every product is gonna have their issues. And for every product, at least within 5,000 miles, 3 months of ownership, they saw enough data to be like, hey, this might potentially be an issue. Let's just add it to the over-the-air update for the next day. Simple as that. It's beautiful. It works perfectly, and Tesla's been doing it for the last 10 years. Ford's now doing it. All these other electric vehicle companies are doing it because it's so convenient for them, and it's less cost for them because we don't have to go to the dealership, waste all that service time, etc. So, great system, love it, and it helps everybody out, because I might go downstairs like tomorrow morning, well, I will, to go to work, and it might be like, hey, we did an over-the-air update, your vehicle's checking out completely fine, we were just doing a redundant software check. Something simple as that, like, hey, I'm super happy with that. You're constantly monitoring my car to make sure it's up to par. So that's the best thing, I think, with electric vehicles. Now, what I'm trying to get to for the very end of this video is the end result. So theoretically, and I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, is less moving parts equal higher reliability. Plain and simple. It's just the way it works. Yeah, so basically anything that has less parts to it is less prone to breaking. This you can see in every single electric vehicle per brand. So Chevy Bolt, when Chevy produced the Bolt, that became their #1 most reliable vehicle. Why? Because you can see how little of parts just to get the vehicle moving compared to a normal internal combustion engine. Yes, there's a lot of trucks and cars that are very reliable nowadays. It's still, though, like you got that 1-to-10 ratio where there's just so much less going on with electric vehicles versus internal combustion. There's a lot that can go wrong here. So usually higher reliability. Now again, this is also the lower overall cost for extended period of time. It's very true. You can fight me on it. I'm okay with it. So just for an example, going from my F-150 truck to my mach-e, I was able to afford 66% more cost of a car because of that. Now, the reason I say that is my truck was about $500 a month in payments for cost of the vehicle. It was about $33,000 for a truck. I bought it brand new. Now, with that, I had also maintenance costs and then fuel costs. My fuel costs at the end, when I got rid of it, were about $400 a month. So just if we get rid of the maintenance costs, just for layman's terms, I was spending probably close to $900 on my truck every single month, just for gas and payment. Now, this car is $56,000. So I was able to go up about 66% more. My payment's $700. I have $60 worth of maintenance over basically the lifetime of the car. So I'm not even gonna add that. And then to fuel this car, I drive about 17,000 miles per year. I'm averaging about 3.7, 3.8 miles per kilowatt, which breaks down to about $35 per month on off-peak hours. That's ridiculously cheap, ridiculously cheap. So going from 900, now I'm about $735 per month. I was able to afford almost a $60,000 car because of no maintenance and no electricity costs. That is phenomenal. Now, that was a little bit extreme because it's going from a truck to a mach-e, and you're going to have to do your own math, because going from like an SUV to a mach-e would be a little bit lower, so you could go from about 20 to 45% more, based on a lot of things. Like, my wife doesn't drive too much. She spent a couple $100s a month on her gas charge, so she's more at this 20%. So her car was like $20,000, so she could go 20% more than that, so you can add about $25,000 to the vehicle. So that's pretty good. You can actually afford more of a car, and that's why these EVs, they're expensive for sure, but a lot of people don't understand that, hey, with lower maintenance and lower electricity costs, fuel costs, like, you can actually afford a lot more. And the best thing about this is, right before I signed the papers on this, I wanted to keep my truck or the next car for 10 years. So for my truck, after it got paid off after 6 years, I'm still paying $400 or $500 a month on maintenance and fuel costs. It's still there, it's not going away, and then there's a higher probability based on this that there's going to be an issue in the future that's going to add more costs. Now, when I did the mach-e, if I graph this out, you would see that initial cost is a lot higher, but after 6 years, it drops off. After 6 years, I have 20 bucks maybe every couple months in maintenance, and then $35 a month in fuel costs. Literally nothing. I am ecstatic. After 6 years, I'm gonna be, or even earlier, I'm gonna have a vehicle that basically I don't even have to put any money into. Again, yes, there's a potential of something going wrong here, for sure, but the chances are a lot lower compared to an internal combustion engine. So, but again, like, if you guys drive a lot, like if you drove as much as me, like 17,000 miles, and you're pumping $400 a month into your SUV, you could easily afford a jump to an electric vehicle, for sure. Look at a Tesla, look at a Mach-E. These things, depreciation isn't the greatest, so after a few years or a lease ends, you guys could definitely afford this. So, but that's the end of my video. If you guys really enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. I love reading all these comments, so if you got any comments on this, hit me up. I definitely try to respond to every single one I can. But yeah, so if you guys liked it, please subscribe. Really appreciate it. Till next time.